Two, one. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Inside Movies Galore. I am your host, David Strege, and here in the room I have with me director Mark Pirro. Is that correct?
Close enough.
Okay. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and how you got involved in the independent film industry?
Well, let's see. How far back do we want to go? I started when I was about 13. I was given a movie camera for Christmas and started making little Super 8 movies with classmates, friends, and that was all done in upstate New York, a place called Ithaca, New York. And then moved out to Hollywood about 1974. Got a job as a tour guide at Universal Studios. Ended up meeting a lot of potential actors, people that wanted to become actors. And I thought, I'll just start doing the same thing out here that I was doing then. So I picked up another Super 8 movie camera outfit and started making some short films using the actors that I met. And then graduated ultimately to starting to do features.
Okay. Why don't we begin with asking you about those original short films that you started out with? Because ultimately they ended up on your Vinegar Syndrome Blu-ray as extras. And thank you for signing them. I know it was kind of a huge ask, but why don't you tell us about your first short films, Buns and The Spy Who Did It Better? How you got involved with those projects?
Okay, well, as I said, when I came out here and became a tour guide, I was a tour guide for about 5 years and didn't really do anything movie related. So that's when I decided to get back into the realm of making films, picking up a Super 8 film outfit. And then we did Buns, which was a 20-minute short using a bunch of my friends, and just kind of did it to get back into the field of making a film. I thought, well, let's try something a little more ambitious. So then we did The Spy Who Did It Better, which was kind of a James Bond parody, and again using a lot of the same people that I met at Universal as a tour guide. We put that together over about, I don't know, it was like a 4 or 5 month period, and at the time was really proud of it. We wanted to make our own version of a James Bond movie with like no money. So, we had a high-speed jet skateboard chase down the streets of Las Vegas. I mean, as high speed as you could get. And, just kind of gave it a Bond flair, but that was it for the shorts. And then I ended up doing Polish Vampire, which is a feature.
Okay. Why don't you tell us about a Polish Vampire? How did you get involved with that project?
Well, that one, I started out with a movie. It was a script called Virgin Vampire. It was about a vampire that never bit anybody in his life because he thinks his fangs are too small. And it was going to star Eddie Deason, who is the character actor from Grease and I Want to Hold Your Hand. And, he did a lot of earlier films for bigger directors, but he'd never really starred in anything. So this was going to be a starring vehicle for him. And then a few months into production, he just kind of went, I don't think I want to do this anymore, because he wasn't really getting the treatment that he was used to working on Spielberg film or Zemeckis film. So he left the project. I ended up rewriting the script, jumping in the role myself, and then retitled it to A Polish Vampire in Burbank, because the movie kind of started resembling an American Werewolf in London with the corpse that keeps coming back from the dead to help someone else out. So anyway, so we put that film together. It was only originally made as a showcase. We didn't really think we were going to sell it or do anything with it, because it was really just a way of us making a movie and maybe getting other work as a result of it. And to everybody's surprise, it sold. We ended up getting it on home video. Home video was kind of new at the time, so the timing worked out well for that. And then we got it on USA Network. I mean, it was a really big surprise for all of us. I mean, the whole movie cost $2,500 to make, and it's made its money back.
Okay, and where did you happen to film A Polish Vampire?
Well, it was all local. It was in and around the Los Angeles area. We shot some of it up at Universal Studios. We had a little moment where they're going through this castle, which was the tour castle. They had they had an attraction there called Castle Dracula, so we used it for like establishing shots. And then I had a friend who, one of the only people I knew that owned a house, and he allowed us to use his garage to create one of the rooms within the castle. So
Okay.
Dupa's bedroom is in a garage,
Okay.
and then, you know, like the apartment scenes, we just shot in the apartment that I was living in at the time, and we had the bar scene, which was a restaurant at the time. It was called Mucho Mas, and it was owned by a friend of mine who who allowed us to go in there and use that. So, you know, we kind of just used whatever we had available to us.
Okay. If there is a particular moment or scene that you could take from that film at this moment, like looking back, uh, what would you take from it?
Well, I mean, if you're looking at a scene that I really enjoy, I guess it would be the dream sequence, because that was kind of a film noirish sort of a look, black and white, you know, mood lighting, that sort of thing.
Okay.
That was an enjoyable scene to do. But then there were also other scenes like him running home, trying to get into his coffin before the sunlight comes up. Shooting that all over with different effects and trying to get smoke coming out of him and catching on fire, that sort of thing. A lot of that was done by my stuntman at the time, a guy named Eric Megason, who I'd worked with at Universal as well. Before I was a tour guide, I worked in the stunt department for the tour, and I met him there. So he did a lot of the doubling of me, like when the cars are screeching off the road and almost crashing into him. That was him doing me. So I guess, yeah, those are probably two of the most memorable bits from the film.
Okay. And then I guess after Polish Vampire in Burbank, you did Death Row Game Show several years later, correct?
Let's see, that would have been 86 we started Death Row Game Show, or 87. Yeah, because after we finished Polish Vampire, we started working on Curse of the Queer Wolf, and
Okay.
we got through pretty much all the shooting of it, and we were into post production when I was contacted by Crown International Pictures, who had seen some of the clips, and asked me if I'd be interested in directing a film for them, which ended up being
Mm-hmm.
Death Row Game Show. So we stopped production, or we stopped the post production on Queer Wolf, went and shot Death Row Game Show. We did that reasonably quickly. I think we shot it within 3 weeks or a month,
Nice.
and then after we were done with Death Row Game Show, then we went back and finished up Queer Wolf. So although Queer Wolf came out after Death Row Game Show, it was still shot before Death Row Game Show.
Okay. Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about Death Row Game Show and your experience on the set, and if you like, what kind of cameras did you use?
What was it? It was an Aeroflex camera, I believe, and it
Okay.
was the first time any of us had shot 35 millimeter. So it was quite overwhelming for us in a way, because don't forget, we all came out of the Super 8 movie making world.
Mm-hmm.
So we brought in people. We actually brought in some people that were a little more experienced in 35 to sort of hold our hand and help us along the way. But it was quite overwhelming, because all of a sudden now, you need permits to shoot, and
Mm-hmm.
got giant grip trucks here and there, and you're not just kind of sneaking around and going in and out and doing it the way we did it prior.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, we even had an encounter with the Teamsters, who were wondering why we weren't using Teamster drivers on our film. And it was kind of like, guys, yeah, this whole, the budget of this movie is your donut budget. I mean, we didn't have the money to spend on drivers, although it was a bigger budget than I'd ever worked on before, because it was Crown's money. But we
Mm-hmm.
were still sort of pushed into the real world of filmmaking, where there were real rules and dealing around unions and all the other little things that come with that world.
How did you go about and search for your cast for the film?
Well, most of my cast, if you're talking about my earlier films, most of my casts were people I knew from Universal Studios and some of their friends. And, so when we moved from one movie to the next, we would try to use a lot of the same people. In fact, there's a couple of actors that have been in practically every movie I've ever made, like John McCafferty's a perfect example.
Hmm.
Of the 11 movies I've made, I think he only missed like 2. And then now when we do a movie and I don't have a specific person for a part, then I
Hmm.
might just run a casting call. There was a newspaper in the day called Dramalog where you could
Okay.
advertise for actors. Now I think well, I can't remember. There's a bunch of them online where you can post your movie and what you're looking for, and then
Hmm.
actors can respond, and you usually get a pretty good response with that.
Okay. Um, so what was it like putting together Death Row Game Show, production wise?
Well, like I say, it was a bit more overwhelming because you're dealing with well, let's put it this way. You shoot a Super 8 film, you've got a little camera that was about the size of that. And then
Hmm.
you want to move and you want to get a different setup, boink, you're there. 35 millimeter, it takes a long time. So if you want to do a setup where you have to turn the camera around or something, you're going to be waiting about an hour, and the lighting has to be tweaked entirely differently. There's so many other little things you have to deal with. There's, a lot of people that would be around to do one job, whereas in Super 8, you have one person doing 10 jobs. So there was a lot of adjustment that we had to make. And the team that we brought in to help us started taking advantage of our naivety. And they were sort of, some of them were stealing from the crew, from the production. Some of them were just kind of screwing us over, and we didn't even realize it until later. But our team, which came from Super 8, I think we were intimidated by them because they had worked, some of them had worked in 35 before, and they were looking at us like, who do these guys think they are? I had my cinematographer on the film, my director of photography, Craig Bassick. He
Hmm.
came right from the Super 8 world, and
Okay.
he had an assistant that was I think the camera operator, who all his life wanted to be a director of photography, but now he's an assistant to my director of photography, who got the job just because he worked with me on the Super 8 film. You know what I mean? So I can understand
Hmm.
why some of them were a little upset about who these kids were that came in and all of a sudden, you know.
Oh yeah, I could definitely see that.
Mm.
So how did you feel about how I guess at the time your film kind of um, when Running Man came out, um, how did you feel about learning that there were similarities or whatnot with that, and
Yeah,
how did you deal with
well,
that?
I was very surprised about it because I never even heard of the film when we were making our movie. And every review that came out for Death Row Game Show, pretty much every one of them mentioned Running Man. And they say things like, how did they get this spoof out so fast? I mean, Running Man came out a week after this movie or something, because I think Running Man actually came out a week after Death Row Game Show. But because Running Man got all the heat, it was like we were the one that was the ripoff. So I was very surprised by it. And, since it's been re-released on Blu-ray, now there aren't that many comparisons to Running Man anymore, and I think the funny thing is that Crown Pictures capitalized on Running Man, so they started to make ads that looked very similar to Running Man, which was running in the same theaters. So it would say something like the year is 1995 and game shows are now the way of life or something, but they tried to make it look a little bit like the Running Man posters or Running Man
Okay.
ads. And I understand why. It was just their way of trying to cash in on the success of Running Man.
Okay. Going on into your next film, Curse of the Queer Wolf.
Mhm.
How did you get involved with that project?
Well, there was a Queer Wolf character introduced in Polish Vampire in Burbank, and
Okay.
he was a minor character. He's only in a couple of scenes, but whenever we would screen the movie, that character got some great responses. It was so out there. And after Polish Vampire was done, I thought, well, that might be a fun movie to expand on. So we'll take the concept of the Queer Wolf and just tell his story, how it happened.
Okay.
In essence, it's the Wolfman. It's a retelling of the Wolfman story. with the exception of instead of him turning into a wolf, he turns into a transvestite, which was made at a time before transvestites became sort of an in thing. But so we expanded on the story and really kind of played off of the whole Wolfman concept. We kind of parody American Werewolf in London. We kind of parody The Exorcist, Deliverance. There's a lot of segments in the movie where you can go, oh, yeah, I see where they're getting that from. And it was just a kind of a funny little thing we thought we would do, and thought we would try to see if maybe we could follow up with the success that we had with Polish Vampire.
Okay. And how was working with the cast and crew on the set of Curse of Werewolf?
For the most part, they were fine. I mean, we had some issues with the lead, who eventually got a little tired of the role. I got to understand that we're working around people's schedules, but it's a long shoot. We might go, I don't know, 6 months sometimes. Maybe we'll shoot a day here, and then we won't shoot for a week, and then we'll shoot another day. So it dragged on. And our lead actor got a little disenchanted with it, so we were afraid. We were afraid he was going to pull an Eddie Deason on us and walk out of the project. And I don't know how we would have saved this movie if he walked. So we kind of walked on eggshells and catered to him as best we could. I mean, if he would show up and say, "Okay, look, I got to be out of here in 3 hours," and we'd say, "Well, we have 14 pages to do." Well, that's your problem. I got to be out of here in 3 hours. So. We would bite our tongue and we would just do what we had to do. Now, fortunately, Kent Butler, who played Richard Cheese in the movie, was an absolute trooper. He was there more than we needed him. So we gave a lot of the scenes that were originally written for the lead to him. All the people that die in the clinic scenes, those were originally written for Larry's character. But I rewrote it so that Dick Cheese could do those things and probably get away with it a little better because his character was a lot more out there and quirky. Taylor Whitney, who played the female lead in it, was wonderful. I think it was one of her earliest films. And, she was great. She was frustrated like the rest of us when we were having issues with the lead, but we got through it. And then, there were the usual regulars like John McCafferty, plays one of the queer billies. And I'm trying to remember who else we had in the film there. Jim Bruce, who was one of the Torchmen. He had been in every movie I had made up until the point. Well, he died in 1999. So he was in every movie I made up until 1999. And again, he was great too. So for the most part, most of the cast and the crew were, wonderful.
Okay. And if there was a moment that you could take from Werewolf that you personally liked after filming it, what would you take from it now looking back?
That would have to be the queer billy scene. In fact, when we were shooting it, I couldn't keep from laughing because, we got John McCafferty with the teeth in and being the whole, squeal for us kind of guy, just cracked us all up. And I had written the queer billy theme song, I think the night before. So we actually were singing it on location while they were running around chasing him with the bow and arrow and the gun and the whole bit. So I think that's probably the most memorable scene for me anyway, or the funniest scene for me in the film.
Okay. And how was the film's reception once it got out there to the public? Did it receive a home release video?
It did. It had some minor releases that I wasn't really too crazy about. We had one company called Radon Entertainment that was releasing it, and they didn't do a very good job. In fact, they ended up going bankrupt not too long after we made the deal. Then we did independent releases of it. We released it on our own through our own company. But I'm sorry, before that, there was a company called MTI out of Florida that released it. And again, not the greatest release. So now we have the best success by putting it out on our own, through our own label. We sell it through our website. We sell it through eBay, Amazon, and it's on Tubi now. You can see it for free streaming on Tubi. So it's it's popping up here and there, and it's still doing well. It's getting a better reception now than it did originally, even though it got great reviews when it first came out. From Variety, Fangoria, they all said if you can kind of get past the concept of a guy turning gay when the moon rises, you got a pretty funny film here. And And I think now it's even more accepted because it doesn't put down really, the transvestite lifestyle. It kind of puts down the homophobia that's behind it. And we didn't really make it with the intention of putting anything down or insulting or whatever. We just did it to be entertaining. Anytime I do a film, there's really rarely a message or a moral or a meaning. It's always just to entertain.
And ultimately, after Curse of the Queer Wolf, you some years later directed Nudist Colony of the Dead.
Mm-hmm.
How did you get involved with that project, and did you use any previous actors and actresses from your previous films in there?
Okay, well, the way I got involved with it is there was a company in Burbank that sold Super 8 equipment. They were one of the few places that actually still kept that medium alive. They got in touch with me, and I made friends with the owner for a while, and it was sort of like, well, why don't we make a Super 8 film using our equipment and our lights and everything we've got? You have unlimited access to all the stuff that we have. So I agreed to do it. I had the script. And I went back to the guy that had done all the music for my previous films, Greg Gross, his name is. And we wrote songs. A girl named Joyce Mordeau, who was also part of it, who did a lot of the singing, got together with all of them, put this movie together. A lot of the same cast members. John McCafferty plays one of the geeky guys in it. And we brought in some new actors as well. We found a bunch of new people that I'd never worked with before, and most of them were fine. But the problem we were having with that is the equipment was so bad. We were using these antique cameras that really weren't calibrated well. So, we'd shoot a scene and then we'd get the footage back and it would come back dark, or it'd come back with splices in it from the lab. I mean, they didn't really care. So at one point, we started to bring in a 16 millimeter camera to try and pick up the slack. And that helped a little bit. But most of that film, I was so embarrassed by the way it came out visually. I've become a little more accepting of it over the years, because now you can kind of look back at it and say, well, that was then. But we had so many issues with it that I don't really look back fondly at the experience. We did get a little bit of that pressure, or not pressure, but we got a little bit of a press from Entertainment Tonight and a show called Hard Copy, and even Fox News did a segment on it. So because of the title, it was such a quirky little title that people started to look into this, and they, got a little bit of heat from it. So,
okay.
But again, that's when I declared I would never shoot another Super 8 movie again, and that's why I didn't make a movie for a long time after that.
So ultimately, where did you end up filming Nudist Colony Dead? Still in Burbank?
Most of it was shot at there's a place it's a woodsy area called Topanga Canyon out here, and our the guy that let us use it, he was a filmmaker as well. I think his name was David George or something. He had made a movie called Surf Nazis Must Die.
Okay.
And I had met him somehow through the partying line. I don't remember how we met, but he owned this property that he made available to us. So we shot most of it there. A lot of the interior scenes we shot at that place in Burbank that ran Super 8 equipment. So they let us use their area for some of the scenes. And I think that's really it. Between the campgrounds and some of those locations, that's pretty much where we shot a lot of that film.
Okay. If there was a particular scene that you could take from this film that you actually did enjoy, now looking back, what would it be?
I think I liked the corpses rising from the grave moment. I think I like the music behind it. I like the way it looks. We set up some rig where we had people underneath it and coming out from the dirt and all that. And it actually is a lit well scene. So that's a moment that I really enjoy. I also enjoy working with Forrest J. Ackerman, who played the judge in this film. I had worked with him before on Queer Wolf. He did a brief scene in Queer Wolf and was in this movie as well. And it was a pleasure to be around because he had so much history behind him. But
Hmm.
yeah, so I'd say those are the two things that stand out on this film that I kind of like.
Okay. And how was the film's reception once it got out there?
It's weird because it's sort of accumulated a reception over time. When it first came out, it didn't really get much of a release because there really was no way to get it out into the masses. It didn't look good enough to get on cable television or anything like that. So we did our own independent releases of it. Then years later, I made a DVD version of it, which put some supplemental stuff in it and all. And it's been doing okay. I mean, we're getting responses. People order it through my website or they order it through Amazon. And
Okay.
and that was on, I think that was on Amazon Prime for all. I don't know if it still is, but it's got its little cult following, like a lot of my films do.
Okay. And then after that project, you got involved with another project called Buford's Beach Bunnies.
Nice.
How did you get involved with that project?
Well, there was a company out there, I think it was called Axis International, and they were kind of following my career around. And they tend to make sexploitation films. They would make movies for Cinemax or any of these, late night bump and grind kind of softcore porn movies. And they
Hmm.
contacted me and said, we'd like to take the elements of what you put in films, comedy, and mix it with the elements that we're noted for, sex. So we made a sex comedy, basically.
Hmm.
And that was another 35 millimeter film. Like I said, after Newest Colony of the Dead, I said, I'm done with Super 8. So they said, no, we're going to shoot this on 35. They gave us about a $400,000 budget to work with. So again, we're now sitting on softer cushions and eating better meals. And
Hmm.
and so as we got into production on that one, it was handled like a big professional movie. We rented a location in Malibu. Trying to remember. Yeah, we used a couple. We used Michelli's restaurant again, which is this Italian restaurant I've used in many of my films. But when the movie was done, they recut it, which kind of upset me. And they wanted a movie that had more sex than comedy. I gave them a movie that had more comedy than sex. So they started cutting it down from, I think it was 101 minutes. They cut it down to like 90 minutes. And what they cut were a lot of the bits and the jokes and the comedy. So that it would
Hmm.
the ratio of sex to comedy would be higher for them. And I sort of disavowed that film. I rarely, talk about it. I rarely have anything to do with it. I sort of had to look at it as, okay, I was hired to make this film. I became like a surrogate mother, and then once the movie's done, I
And
gotta
they wanted a different creative idea.
I gotta let it
That's
go. Yeah.
basically
But
it.
from that experience, I pretty much said, all right, from now on, I'm getting Final Cut. And whether it's going to be my own film or any other company that wants to hire me to do a film, it's just too painful. And it shouldn't be. You should be able to just walk away from it. But I know bigger directors than me have had to deal with other people coming in and meddling with their work.
Oh
And
yeah.
it takes an artist to really understand how that feels when somebody comes in and says, no, I think this scene should be gone, or we got to take that out, or whatever. And even though I got paid to make the film, I got paid to write it and all that, so I had to sort of step back and say, all right, look, it was their movie. They own it. They can do whatever they want with it.
Now you ended up using Robin Blythe from your Death Show, a film in this particular film, correct?
Yeah, she's been in a few of my films.
Okay, and I know that on the set of a Death Row show, you had an interesting relationship on the set. um, did you have any problems going forward as you were continuing to use her in your films?
Not really. I mean, it was an interesting thing that when we did Death Row Game Show, both John McCafferty, the star of the film, and myself, we both kind of fell for Robin. I mean, she was such a sweetheart that we just sort of fell in love with her, basically. And that happens on film sets. There are relationships that are formed all the time. But if you saw the behind the scenes of Death Row Game Show, it's pretty well explained in the documentary. that both John and I agreed that neither one of us was going to make any moves on Robin until the movie's done, because it was more important to make the movie as opposed to going out and, getting laid or whatever. So we were working on the movie, and then I find out that John go ahead and he's already sleeping with her. So we became sort of like Popeye and Bluto for the rest of the movie. We were both competing for Robin's affection. Eventually, their little romance split up. I picked up the pieces, and then Robin and we lived together for a couple of years after that. Then I put her in Buford's Beach Bunnies. She went under her married name, which is Robin Webb in that film. And I thought, okay, well, that's probably going to be the end of our working relationship. But then whenever I do a movie and a cameo is required, like in Rectuma, she played a news reporter. In my current film that I just finished, she again plays a news reporter. And the funny part about it is that whenever she's talking on camera and there's a little lower third that says Gloria Sternvirgin. So she's still playing the character Gloria Sternvirgin, which she played in Death Row Game Show, but now Gloria Sternvirgin has become a news reporter.
So ultimately, is there a favorite shot from Buford's Beach Bunnies that you could take from this film now looking back?
Favorite shot? I enjoyed the segment where he's seeing various celebrities telling him to not to go into a specific room. So we had a Clint Eastwood look-alike, we had a Humphrey Bogart look-alike, and we had a Marilyn Monroe look-alike. And that was a fun bit to do. We did them all in one day, I think. And the Marilyn Monroe look-alike was phenomenal. I mean, she looked so much like her. It was almost like directing Marilyn Monroe, without the drugs. But so we basically, and I guess I would look at that and enjoy it. We also, one of the actors in the film who plays the brutish Scud, Black Plowman, Charlie Rossman, he was so much fun to work with. I mean, he was, he had lived a lot. And he had a really good sense of humor. And then I lost touch with him for years, and then got in touch with him again maybe 4 years ago. We bumped into each other at a screening. And he's been in my last two films now, so I brought him back to the fold, as it were. But
okay,
yeah.
So far out of the films that we have talked about, were any of these locations that you shot at a favorite that you have shot at?
A favorite location?
Yeah.
Well, I would say, I don't know if it's a favorite, but it's certainly the most used location is Michelli's restaurant. It's a restaurant here in North Hollywood in Universal City, and I've known the owner for decades. So anytime any movie of mine needed an Italian restaurant, he's always there. So it started with Polish Vampire. There's a scene where Dupa and Dolores are in an Italian restaurant, and she's talking about her love for vampire movies. That was done at Michelli's. Then we go to Queer Wolf, the bar scene where he picks up the two girls. That was Michelli's restaurant. Death Row Game Show. Even Bino, who takes Gloria to the restaurant, even says, "Hey, I know this great restaurant called Michelli's. Let's go there." So, and I think, and Buford's Beach Bunnies, where Jim Hanks attacks the girl after he gets hypnotized. That was Michelli's. So yeah, even in the movies I'm doing now, the last movie I did, I needed a bar again. I went back to Joe Michelli, the owner of the place. I haven't used it in a few years. And I said, could we come in again? And he goes, here's the key. Just leave it, bring it back tomorrow. So yeah, I would say that's the location that, if nothing else, is the one that has become the staple of Paramount Pictures.
Okay. So what kind of reception did Buford's get that you know of? I know that you said that you didn't like the cut that they took from it, but what kind of reception did it get after that?
I didn't really follow what happened after it got out. I know that it played on a lot of pay-per-view channels. I think it played on Showtime or HBO, that sort of thing. Since I had no stake in the movie at all, I got paid to make it, and that's the end of it. I just kind of walked away from it. Although I do offer a director's cut version through my website, which technically I probably shouldn't be doing because technically I don't own the movie. But my excuse has always been, look, if any of my followers want to see the uncut version. This is the only way they can see it, so I'm just making it available.
You can get away with that. I've talked with many different independent directors. As long as you only like sell only so many or whatever. I mean, I know many people who do it. So
yeah, nobody's bothered me. And again, my argument would have been, okay, you want me to stop selling it? Put out the version that I made. Put out the director's cut version, and then maybe we'll stop selling it. But I get people that dig up that film and they find it and say, where's your version of it? So there it is.
Okay. After Buford's, you went into a TV production called An Early Grave.
You have snacks here? Is that a snack?
I am not eating yet. My fiance actually just came and brought some lunch.
I was going to say, I hope you brought enough for everybody. Anyway,
well,
sorry, go ahead. What was your question?
You got into a production called An Early Grave, and you filmed it in 1997. Is that correct?
You know what? I know very little about that, because if I did anything on it, I might have edited it for somebody. I wasn't behind it in any way.
Okay.
I didn't make it, but there's a time between movies I might have been editing other people's films, and that's probably one of them.
Okay. I guess the next film is Colorblinded. How did you get involved with that particular film?
Well, Colorblinded, I actually dated a black gal for a while. It was Darwin Carson, who was in my earlier films. She was in Queer Wolf. She was in Death Row Game Show. So she was in Nudist Colony of the Dead. And we talked about how her life would have been so much different if she were white. And she would always say, there's so many things in my life would be a lot different if I were white. And I used to say, oh, come on, you're just being paranoid. Said, no. Walk a mile in my shoes and you'll know. Well, if I walk a mile in your shoes, I'm a mile away from you and I got your shoes. But anyway, so I started writing a movie based on that concept. I said, okay, what would happen if one day a black girl, beautiful black girl, wakes up and she becomes a beautiful white girl? Kind of ran with that concept. The original title was called A Little Black and White Issue, and it originally was going to come out in black and white. In fact, once we finished the movie, and it first was premiered, it premiered in black and white. Then later on, I thought, it's hard to sell a black and white film these days. So I put the color back in and then re-released it as a color film. But the whole concept of a black girl that finds out that she gets a little bit better treatment as a white woman, that whole concept kind of played on me for a while. And then in the movie, the black girl, who is now white, starts getting into her own self. She starts realizing, hey, life is a little better this way. And she can, she gets, talks out of a ticket with a cop that never happened when she was black. And there were so many things in the movie. And again, it wasn't really made other than to be entertaining, but there were a lot of people that got a lot out of it. There were a lot of people that said, yeah, I can see that there's a little bit of a statement here. And, again, this was long before the Black Lives Matter movement came into play. Mm-hmm. But it was an interesting concept how people are treated differently, based on their race. And we kind of...
And it is interesting once you touch on subjects of that nature. I mean, I know how touchy some people can get and whatnot, and you're skating a fine line sometimes.
Yeah. That's true, but it's something that never really worried me with any of my films, because you can look at any one of my films and probably find something that's going to upset somebody. I mean, in my current film, we have an abortion clinic that runs like Animal House, so they've got, they have fetus fights, and they, there's a biohazard container that has a basketball hoop above it. I mean, so I know people are going to have a problem with that, but it's never been an issue with me. I make a movie to be entertaining, and I hopefully entertain people that have the same sense of humor that I have. So if I think it's funny, I know people that think like me will think it's funny. And if there's people that don't, to quote Quentin Tarantino, let them go suck a cock.
And what I say to that, bravo.
That's not my quote.
But where did you happen to film Colorblinded?
Let's see.
Location wise.
Well, that was all local. We shot a lot in various apartments because a lot of the movie takes place in apartments. But there's a telecenter that I think the movie starts at, and the two girls work at a telecenter. A friend of mine, actually one of the associate producers on the film, worked at a telecenter and was able to make it available for us on a day that they weren't using it. We shot like the rec room or the break room for the telecenter. That was shot at a rec room of condo that I owned at the time. I forget what else we had in that film. There was a theater set I think they were in, which was sort of like a theater group that had an auditorium that looked like a theater. So we used that for one scene. I'm trying to think. I think when the guru is giving his speech about how to improve yourself, that was shot at the same rec room that I had at the condo that I owned. Yeah, I think those are most of the locations there. I think the doctor's office, I forgot where we shot that. I think it was somebody made an office available to us.
Okay.
You know, all these locations are just whatever we have available to us.
How was that on the set with the cast? Did you have any problems like you've had in the past, or did they start getting better as time went forward?
Yeah, it went pretty smoothly. I remember the original actress that we hired to play the lead kind of started becoming a problem very early on, early enough for us to know she's going to be a problem. Ego started coming out. So I immediately replaced her. I think we shot one day with her, maybe 2 days with her. And then I immediately replaced her with Danny Leone, who is a friend of mine, was a friend of mine back then, way back then as well. And she jumped in the role and finished the movie. The girl that was opposite her, her best friend, Tess, the character's name was, played by Verda Bridges, who is Todd Bridges' sister, who had done a lot of stuff early on before me. She was wonderful. She was, at that time, she was one of the best actresses I ever worked with. I mean, she, you know, everything was perfect. She had her lines down. She matched action beautifully, hit her marks perfectly. I mean, you know, it was one of the first times I'd actually worked with an actress that really was spot on. And by the end of the movie, when she's crying and, you know, I mean, she really had us all crying because she was so good at what she was doing. But I don't recall any major issues with the film. I don't think we had any problem. It was the first movie I shot using high-8 video.
Okay.
Home video or, you know, video cameras were starting to come into play. So I got this high-8, you know, camera that we were using. And, you know, I can look at it now and say, well, you know, there's flaws, of course. And I think part of it is that it didn't really look like film, even though we tried our best to make it look filmic. I think I even added little specks of dust and scratches to the film a little bit, or to the video, to give it more of a filmic look. And in black and white, it probably looked more like film than it did when it was in color. But again, I've always been struggling to try and get just that right format that can make this look as polished as possible. And at that time, which was over 20 years ago, I think, maybe 98. Yeah, it's a little over, what was it, 28 years ago? Math's never my subject. Shot at 98, 99, 98, 2008, 2018. Okay, 23 years ago from now. I got it. But it was, you know, it was the first time that I had, again, been 100% responsible for the product, because the last two films prior to that were 35 millimeter, or Death Row Game Show and Buchba. These were 35 millimeters. So now we're getting back into a small gauge, even though it was much better than Super 8, the film.
Okay.
Just a regular 8, yeah.
What kind of reception did Colorblinded get?
Not well. We didn't really get a big release on that film. We put it out on VHS, which again we sold, I think, through my own website, and it didn't get any formal release other than when it was on Tubi. Now Tubi runs it, so you know it's getting its following there. But I say of all my films, that was probably the one that got the least amount of heat.
Okay. After that project, you got involved with Rectuma, which was a couple years later. How did you get involved with that project?
Well, it was just a script that I was working on. I always thought it would be funny to make a Godzilla parody. So the concept of having some guy's ass grow to huge proportions and terrorizing Los Angeles just struck me as funny. And so I kind of followed the Godzilla, Mothra, Rodan kind of formula and put that together. That one was probably the first film that I did that involved special effects.
Okay.
And I was just learning After Effects, which is an effects program that editors use, and I was kind of getting the feel for it. So because this movie is such a parody and a cartoon, you could get away with effects that aren't exactly photoreal. So, we've got some scenes that it almost looks like an animation from South Park, but we got away with it because the comedy was so good. I still look back at that as one of the funniest movies I've ever done. I think that, we premiered it at the AFI in 2003. The reception was just phenomenal. I mean, everybody laughed at everything. It was, I even recorded the audio. I recorded the audio of the audience, and I would listen to it like every night for about a month after we had the premiere because it was just so spot on. Every joke worked, every bit. The funniest. In fact, you can go online on YouTube and see the premiere because we actually had behind the scenes of the premiere, which I'll look back at that and literally probably one of the best nights of my life, the premiere of Rick Tuma.
Now, you ended up working with Paul Bunnell. How was working with him? Because I know that you worked with him on, I think, the God Complex as well, and a couple of others.
Yeah, he goes all the way back to Death Row Game Show with me.
Okay.
I met him, I don't even remember how. I think it was through a mutual friend who said basically, I know this guy. He's making movies like you are. He's doing these Super 8 movies. And somehow we met. And, we compared films. And, I'll show you yours. You show me mine. And everything was kind of cool there. And then I think he mentioned that he wanted to be an actor too. So when we did Death Row Game Show, I put him in a couple of scenes there. Then
really?
He was, he's one of the convicts. And I think I forget the scene, it's towards the end of the movie. He's one of the convicts that has to answer a question correctly. And he's also a stagehand in that film as well. He also plays a small part as a stagehand. Then he was in Buford's Beach Bunnies. It might have been in one of the scenes that was cut from the release because it's a comedy moment. But there's a scene where he is on stage shaving or pretending to be shaving. And then somebody hypnotizes him into believing that there's a California earthquake and he slashes his own throat. So there's that. Then he was in the God Complex, and he's in let me see, he was in Celluloid Soul, and he was in the last movie I made. So yeah, he's been in a handful of my films, and because we both kind of cut from the same cloth, we appreciate helping each other with each other's films if possible. So
definitely,
yeah.
If there was a particular scene that you could take from Rick Tuma, what would it be?
God, there's so many in that film. I think one of the funniest scenes, which was an afterthought that we didn't have in the original script, but I wrote it in later, is after they go to the husband's house, his wife was just murdered, and they want to get a DNA sample from him, so they have him jerk off in a cup, and and then as they leave, the two detectives get into an argument, and she says something to him where she goes like this, and she's got the cup of the load in there, and it gets all over his face, and he just stands there and stares straight ahead as it drips down. That scene, we shot the scene leading up to that, and then the next day or maybe a few days later, I said, what would really be funny is if she makes a motion and just dumps the load in his face. So we went back and shot just that one little bit, which is, that laugh when we premiered it, that laugh went right into the next scene for quite a bit of time. So that's one, but there's so many. I mean, the whole Selma Kun Loudon character, who, he's about to blow himself up with the ass, and he gets a phone call from his wife in Afghanistan, and there's all these different things that happen throughout this film. The two Asian characters that sing the narrative, which I love those little moments where we keep cutting to them. One time they're in a bath are in a shower. One other time they're in a urinal. The scene with the doctor, where the doctor tells him that he only has so much time to live, and every time he tells him, it's like less time and less time. And finally, he says, by the way, could you pay me before you leave today? So. And then I brought that character back in the God Complex. The same doctor character he's Mary's gynecologist in the God Complex. So, yeah, I'm sure I'm leaving things out too, because there's so much in that film that I can just look at and say, God, I love everyone. And in fact, Danny Leone from Colorblinded plays his wife until she gets killed halfway through the film. But it was nice to work with her again.
Okay. So why don't we talk about God Complex? How did you get involved with that film?
Well, a lot of my films have danced around the concept of religion. Buddhist Colony of the Dead has all the religious kids that go into the, into the woods, basically because they want to find God. And so there's moments throughout where we have kind of parodies. I have in Queer Wolf, there's a priest who's more perverted than anybody else in the movie, pretty much. So I thought, let's hit it head on. Let's take the whole mythology of the Bible and just put it on its ear, because there's so many questions that, having been brought up Catholic, there are questions I used to have that were never answered. Okay, you have Adam and Eve. Well, how do you get to everybody else? And Adam and Eve have 2 boys, and well, somebody has to have sex with his mom, to keep this thing going. So I've got all these different questions that we kind of bring up in the movie and answer them, basically. And we do it in a way where it's kind of, played tongue in cheek. Like when Noah gets off the boat, where are all the dead bodies that were left behind that all drowned? Well, we see them. There's hundreds of dead bodies that are all on the ground with flies around them. And, the burning bush, I thought it was obvious. We have it's between Moses's wife's legs, big burning patch there, So, and then there's, other things like God. If you follow any parts of the Bible, God is a very vindictive, angry kind of person, at least in the first part of it. And we kind of figure out, okay, why would God be a big, angry person? Well, maybe he's trying to impress his girlfriend. Maybe he doesn't really like himself. There's a lot of jokes about his hair because he has no hair. They say, well, if you're God, can't you do anything about your hair? And by the end of the movie, we don't even say anything, but he's wearing this really bad toupee, and show that in one scene towards the end. So, and the guy that we used, Gus Alexander, was great. We didn't know if he was going to make it because I didn't realize when we started filming is that he couldn't walk very well. He was wearing leg braces. And a lot of the times the scenes were done with him in a wheelchair. If you see close-ups of him talking, he was sitting in a wheelchair, and we were just, doing the best we could to get by with him. And I thought there was one point when I thought, if he has a heart attack or something during this movie, we're screwed. So I was going to have a scene where he says, I'm tired of being like this. I'm going to change my appearance. And then I was going to have him do this big, and then I could replace him with another actor if necessary. Well, he said, no, don't worry about it. I'm not going anywhere. I'll be fine. Let's just do this. And again, he was great throughout the whole film.
Okay. Did you work with anyone new as an actor or an actress in this particular project?
Yeah, we run it. Well, we had some regulars, of course. We had McCafferty again, John McCafferty. We had Bill Devlin from Recuma.
I was working with McCafferty.
He's always been great. He's he's always been professional. He's always been on time. He's always known his lines. He was always ambitious about being an actor, which is why I always knew if I needed a specific person in any of my films, he'd be the guy to go to. Most of the films would be a cameo where he would shoot 1 or 2 days. A couple of them he was the lead in. Or actually, I think 2 or 3 of them he was a lead character in. But he was great. Now, in this film, we needed a Virgin Mary that I didn't have anybody in my ensemble. So we found Lauren Baldwin, who's an English lady. And she answered an ad that we had placed, and she came along. And there was the guy that played Job. He was a friend of the casting director for the film. I believe, I think that's how he got into it. And there were a few other newbies that we brought into the project as well. But, whenever I bring a new person into it, I'm always a little apprehensive because I need to remind them that this is not a major motion picture. You're not going to have dressing rooms and, catered lunches and all the things that one might be used to. But I've gotten better and better at making that speech so that the people know that, what they're getting into beforehand, and they know that
Hmm.
this is not like a major motion picture. It's almost like, let's just get together and have fun here. Let's do something we can be proud of and have a good time with. So, um,
Definitely.
the
Is there any particular scene that you could take from this film now looking backwards at it?
God complex, the God complex is done in segments, and every segment had its own charm to it. We start with the Adam and Eve segment, then we go to the Noah segment, then I think we go to Job. I forget the order. You meet Moses, and then we wind up with the Virgin Mary getting pregnant and Jesus showing up, and then the end when they all work at a toy store in contemporary times. So I can look at every segment and go, there's something I like about every one of them. There isn't really anything in there. I love the angel scene. We have that one musical number where she comes in and sings to Joseph, bringing him a singing telegram about how his wife got knocked up by God. So, that was a fun little bit of business that we did.
Okay.
The movie itself, I had to create locations for this film because we didn't have the biblical locations that we needed. Most of the time in a movie, we use what locations we have available. But here I
Hmm.
had to build a set. I built a set in my backyard that we redressed and used something like a dozen times. So every time you see the interior of some biblical location, whether it's Noah's house or the restaurant for the Last Supper or Joseph's house, whatever, it was always the same location, just redressed. That was the
Okay.
biggest challenge of that film, I think.
And how is the film's reception so far?
It's doing well. It played at some atheist film festivals, and it's picked up a bit of a cult following as well, mostly from disgruntled Catholics or people that really are frustrated with the concept of religion and how people in 2000 and, well, at the time 2009 still believe in these crazy myths. It's just one of these things where you look at it and go, guys, this is bull, but let's make a comedy about it. I always do my talking in comedy because that way you can always get away with it by saying, I'm just making up comedy, not trying to say something here. But I have a
Okay.
couple of friends that are pretty religious, and
Mhm.
one of them actually took it very well. There's a couple of scenes that she's not a fan of, especially the burning bush. But other than that, she accepted it as a comedy and took it for what it's worth.
Okay. After that, it was several years later that you went out and did Rage of Innocence, correct?
Right, right.
How did you get involved with that project?
Well, that was a script that I had kind of had lying around that I started years ago, and I always thought it's fascinating. You don't have to commit a crime; you just have to be accused of committing a crime sometimes, and you can be in trouble. And if you're accused by a 14, 15-year-old girl, you got a lot of trouble there to try and convince everybody that she's lying. So I thought, okay, that's an idea. Let's work with that. And we tried to find people that were real actors, for the most part. When you do a comedy, you can kind of get away with it if they're not perfect. But if you're going to do a drama or a mystery or a horror film or, something that the actors have to be a little more believable. So
Hmm.
I went to John McCafferty and said, I got a
Okay.
dramatic role for you. If you think you can handle this one, he jumped at it. He loved the idea. So that was his first lead role since Death Row Game Show for me, I believe. And we found Steph Dawson, who was the girl that plays the deranged teenager. And
Hmm.
when we auditioned her, she blew us all away at the audition, so intense that I said to one of the people that were there with me after she left, I said, either this girl is a great actress or she's crazy.
Hmm.
And I didn't really know which until we started working with her and realized what a professional she was. But this was a change of pace for me because I'd never really done anything so incredibly serious. The closest thing could be Colorblinded, even though that was kind of set, in an outer version of reality, but yet
Hmm.
the characters had to be somewhat believable in their situations. Rage of Innocence, they had to be 100% there. And we brought in Bill Devlin again, who was sort of the comic relief in the movie. And Lauren Baldwin, I brought back from the God Complex. She played the babysitter, and
Okay.
again, wonderful in it. Um, forget who else, but there's we brought in a lot of the old team, and we shot it over a period of maybe it was 6-7 months. And while we were making the movie, Steph Dawson got a part in the Hunger Games, and we knew that we were going to be in trouble if we didn't finish up with her before she left, which we didn't. But she was still professional enough to, after she went and did the Mockingjay movies, she still came back and finished our movie. So we shot with doubles for a while she was away. And in fact, some of the scenes worked better because of the double. There's a scene where Lauren Baldwin gets killed, and all you see is the silhouette of the girl. That was a double because our girl was out shooting the Hunger Games. So, we had to kind of use our imagination to work around things. There's a scene where she is she's hooked up to a lie detector, and while she's being questioned, the camera kind of pushes in slowly. That's the double too. And then there's a scene where we cut to a close-up of her, which was taken from a different part of the movie, and then just inserted in there so you'll believe that she's really there. But we had a lot of working around schedules and things like that. But it was a fun film to make, as they all are.
Okay. Is there a particular scene that you could probably take from this particular film, looking backwards at it?
Again, if I were to just draw a moment from it, I love the scene where she's imagining that she's cutting her mother's face up with a razor blade. That never ceases to get a cringe from the audience because nobody knows that it's not happening for real. And then until her mom wakes up. So that was an effective scene. There's another moment where the babysitter, Lauren, comes out of the house because somebody rang the doorbell, and she goes out saying, "Whoever's doing this, stop it, I'm going to call the police." And then we cut to a shot of the door just slowly closing. So the audience thinks, oh, the girl got into the house. But then when we cut back to Lauren, she's standing right behind her, and that's when she, knifes her. So that was sort of a nice little switch where everybody thinks the kid's in the house when she's actually standing right behind her victim. Those are two moments that I kind of really like.
Okay. And so far, how has the film's reception been?
It's been pretty good. We've got a lot of people that have liked the concept that, that a guy can be in such a vulnerable position where a girl does everything she can to frame him for all of these crimes that she's accusing him of. I've even had people that say, I've known people like her, that will just lie and do whatever they can do to get their way. So, and now that it's on Tubi, it's probably getting the best results of all because, when we get the periodical statements from Tubi, it looks like Rage of Innocence is doing the best of everything I've got on there.
Okay. After that, roughly about 4 years later, in 2018, you went out and directed Celluloid Soul. How did you get involved with that project?
Well, yeah, that was we started that one in 2016 and finished it in 2017. And that one, basically, I have a friend who used to be a television actor. He'd been in a lot of television shows in the 70s, 60s, 70s. He was in the original television series of Planet of the Apes. He was one of the astronauts. He was also in a show called Garrison's Gorillas. He was in a lot of these different shows. He was in a show with George Burns and Connie Stevens in the 60s. So I was aware of him, and I met him, and we became friends. And then I started thinking, here's a guy that was really high on the hog in the 60s and 70s, and now nobody knows who he is. His name is Ron Harper. Ron Harper, you could Google him. He, unfortunately, now he has Alzheimer's too, so I go visit him every so often. He's in a care facility, but that's another story. Anyway, I started thinking that here's a person that was doing so well in the 60s and 70s and now completely forgotten. The concept stuck with me, and I thought, well, let's think about all the actors that have come out to do something, and maybe they'll get one movie in their life, or maybe they'll get some TV show, and then they'll be forgotten, unless you're familiar with that show. So, or are you familiar with what they've done before? So our movie, they find a movie from the 1930s, and the hero of the movie falls in love with this actress, and then he finds out she's still alive at, she's like 98 years old now. And then he arranges to meet her, but when she shows up on his doorstep, she looks like she did in the movie, complete with black and white scratches going through her body and all that. So I thought,
Hmm.
you know, let's take that concept about a guy that falls in love with an actress who's, you know, from a bygone era, and then play off of that. And then the conclusion, I think, is very satisfying. If you've seen the film, you know, it's a very satisfying ending where,
Hmm.
you know, there's meaning to what she's doing, and the visit that she's having with this guy and the relationship. And he, you know, he had a fight with his girlfriend, so he's kind of losing his marbles as it is. And it's a very psychological kind of a film. And anyway, I kind of went along with that because I just liked the idea of talking about a forgotten actor from, you know, the past. And Lauren Baldwin again, who goes on, you know, back to God Complex and Rage of Innocence. She was the lead in this film, and again did a bang up job, especially as the old time version of this actress. When you see her in these little snippets that we shot that made it look like it was shot in the 30s, I mean, she
Hmm.
looks like she's right out of the 30s with the hairstyle. And, you know, and then we found a location. One of my actress friends has a kitchen that looks like it hasn't been redone since the 30s. So we shot in this kitchen, and it looks so perfect, you know. And then I got Joyce Mordeau, the girl that does some of the singing in my films. She has a house here in Hollywood, or in the Valley. In the neighborhood looks like it's from the 30s. You know, all the houses look old. So we shot a scene there as well. And
Okay.
those were fun moments to recreate something from the past.
Okay. Um, if there was a favorite shot or scene that you could take from this film, what would it be?
I would say the two black and white segments that we did,
Okay.
the two recreations of the two movies that she supposedly starred in the 30s.
Okay.
I liked those. Anything that we did that involved her interacting with our lead, because you've got a black and white character in a color world, and that
Hmm.
was kind of a challenge to make it work. And we used different methods for depending on what the scene required to get that effect. Sometimes it would be as basic as her wearing black and white makeup, you know, and
Okay.
other times we would shoot her against a green screen. Other times we'd rotoscope around her, you know, and we would do whatever we needed to do to achieve the illusion. And I think it worked really well.
Okay. And how was the film's reception so far?
It was good. I mean, again, this didn't get a huge reception because we had our premiere, and then I never signed with any specific distributor for this film because I've been burned too many times. So this one we've distributed on our own through our website and through Amazon. But I now have representatives that are handling all my films. So now they're the ones that got these movies on Tubi, and, you know, are getting them out there. This one also you can find on Tubi. You know, so the thing is, when you do a small independent film, you can really only go so far with it unless it
Hmm.
really takes off. Everybody likes to point to the Blair Witch Project. That was sort of the poster child
Hmm.
for independent films. But that was the anomaly. I mean, that was the quarter landing on its edge. You know, when you flip a coin, it doesn't happen that often. And usually a filmmaker has to make his own heat. You know, he has to get it to the festivals, which I'm not a fan of, unless you can get it into one of the big five. There really is, festivals are just ways for them to make money off the filmmakers. You know, they charge you an entry fee and then may not even
Hmm.
accept the film. So I'm kind of not really into film festivals anymore. But you know, now that you've got all these streaming channels, there's so many ways for a person to get their film out there, and, you know, hopefully it becomes, people discover it. You know, if people find one movie, in my case anyway, they'll find one of my films, and then they'll go back and say, "Oh my God, I didn't know he did all these other films too." It's like Ed Wood, you know, everybody knew Plan 9, but nobody knew that he had made movies before and after, you know. So that's kind of the wormhole you get into with the independent world.
Definitely. Recently in 2021, you completed a film called The Deceased Won't Desist, correct?
That is correct.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about that project?
Well, this is like an Agatha Christie film. It's about a guy who's dead, and but before he died, he made a series of videos that are going to be played at the reading of his will. So they lure a bunch of people up to his cabin. He owned this cabin in the mountains with snowy mountains and secluded area. And the lawyer puts on the first video. The lawyer played by John McCafferty, again the old the old alumni, and the video basically says he's on the video and he loved cats, so he's got all these cats around him. He's petting cats.
Mhm.
He says, "Look, I never liked any one of you, and the way this is designed is one of you is going to get everything in my estate, which is worth over $700 million. The rest of you are going to be dead by the end of this weekend." And that's kind of the setup. And then as one person after another starts dying, he pops on with a new video. And the video basically makes reference to what just happened. So now people are saying, wait a minute, is he really dead? Did he not die? Is he in another room putting out these these videos? Or is somebody in cahoots with him? That's the question that goes on throughout the film. And as every person dies one by one, the question becomes stronger and stronger, because now you're whittling it down to just a few people until we have a final conflict between the two remaining people. And we find out what happened. But, this film, interestingly enough, we were making this during the COVID crisis. And we actually had an actor bail on us in this movie, which I hadn't had in years. The very odd part about it is it was John McCafferty, the person I would never have expected to bail on a film. But we talked one day and we shot about a third of the movie. And then he said, "Mark, I can't go up to the cabin again with 10 people in this close area." He's pushing 70. He feels that he was in, a higher risk group. This is before they had a vaccine. And so I was a little upset about that, but I understood. I gave him a pass and I said, "Could you at least let me film you in front of a green screen explaining why you are leaving?" Yeah, we could do that. So I wrote a scene, since he's the lawyer that sets this whole thing in motion, after he plays the first video. And he says, "Okay, guys, I've done everything I was hired to do. Good luck. I'm out of here." And we got him leaving. And then I gave the remaining scenes that he would have had to one of the other actresses, because the final conflict was supposed to be between him and one of the other actresses. And because he left the project, I just gave all the dialogue to the other remaining actress, or one of the remaining actresses, and made that become the end of the movie. So it worked. But it was really an interesting project, because we had to go to this cabin that's about 100 and, I forget it. It's at least an hour and a half away from where most of us are located here. And it was owned by by Jerry Danielson, who wrote the music for this movie. And he wrote the music for my last two movies. So he had a cabin that he made available to us that we all traveled out to. So that was probably the most ambitious as far as getting to a location several times with all these actors.
Okay. So had you ended up using any newer actors or actresses while you were filming this particular project?
Yeah, we got a few new ones in this one. Actually, Deborah Lamb, who was in Death Row Game Show, she was the Shanna Shallow character in Death Row Game Show. I lost touch with her for years because she had moved up north. And then when I premiered Celluloid Soul, she showed up at the premiere. She came back into town. So we got back, acquainted again after all these years. And she said, "Keep me in mind for your next project." So it just so happened that when we did this film, I had a part for her. So she plays the ex-wife of the deceased. And it was the first time we'd worked together in years. So it was great to be back together again. But we got some new people in this one. Sarah Carson, the elderly lady that plays the stepmother of the deceased. She answered one of our ads for actresses. Coincidentally, she happens to be Johnny Carson's cousin, for what it's worth, and then I brought in, we brought in another actress named Danny Scott, who plays one of the abortionists. She's new. G. Larry Butler is a gentleman who plays a priest. He's new. Some of these were friends of Deborah Lamb, though. So I gave Deborah Lamb the credit of casting babe, because she brought in a few actresses. There's a lady that works at a bar in this movie.
Okay.
She has a quick scene in a bar. She's new. Damon Evans, he's a black filmmaker in this film. He goes all the way back to Rectuma. He played a thug in Rectuma. He played a waiter at the Last Supper in the God Complex. and
Okay.
he was a cop in I think Rage of Innocence. So yeah, so we had a mixed bag, of some of the old ones and some of the new ones. And again, with the exception of John McCafferty leaving the project, nothing else. Everything else was fine. All the actors were there, even ones that could have been in a high risk for COVID. But we did our best to, socially distance and keep everybody as safe as possible. And we got through it.
Okay. And if there was a scene that you could probably take from this film that you enjoyed from it, what would you take from it?
Well, I don't know. Again, if it's a scene I enjoy, there's a moment we had to keep going back to the cabin to get
Mm-hmm.
pickup shots. We went there 2 or 3 times with most of the cast, and then we went there a couple of times with just a few of the cast. But there was one day we needed to go up, and we needed to go up when there was actually snow on the ground sometimes to give it a little more realism. We were looking for. We added fake snow, but there was one scene where we wanted to show the older lady walking around the back of the cabin, going down into the basement. She wasn't available, so I said, "Can I have your clothes for this scene?" And
Mm-hmm.
literally, I am wearing her clothes going down into the basement for a wide shot. And I think there's some stills of that on the DVD, but that was pretty wild, because I could barely fit into her little slim outfit. But I
Mm-hmm.
got this little dress and I got this little shirt and a white wig. And other than that, I thought that well, let's see, the funeral scene at the beginning of the film was fun.
Okay.
There's an abortion commercial scene that we shot that I'm actually in, which I shot with Ann DeVenzio, who's another actress I've used a few times, and Doug McPherson, who plays the abortionist. I was
Okay.
almost going to take that part myself, but I gave it to him because I thought, well, I've used him a few times and he's good. So yeah, so again, it's hard to pull a specific out of this one, but for the most part, I'm pleased the way it turned out.
Okay. Of all of your films that you have filmed, is there a particular favorite of yours that you have accomplished?
Well, I've been asked that question before, and it's a tough question to answer because it's like your children. If you were to
Mm-hmm.
say, who's your favorite child? Now, I can look at every one of them and say something specific, like Polish Vampire was technically my first child, so there's a very soft spot in my heart for that film. Queer Wolf, I think, was probably one of the weirdest children I had, at that time. Then God Complex is probably the smartest kid I think I had because he's got a lot of intellect in that character. Let's say Buford's Beach Bunnies is probably the kid that came out a little retarded and he's sort of slow in the corner. And then what are the other ones? Rage of Innocence is probably my most serious child. That's the one that I think went to college and really kind of made something of himself. And Celluloid Soul is a sentimental one for me. It's a very sentimental movie, and I can look at that with a different mindset. And then the current one, well, it's too soon to tell, But as far as comedy goes, I really think Rectuma is the funniest movie I've ever made, followed by God Complex and Queer Wolf. The only one I'm really not that proud of is Buford's Beach Bunnies. I think that's a movie that I would not have made had I not been paid to make it for somebody else.
Okay. Well, I thank you for your time. Where can we find many of your projects? And how did you? What made you decide to call your production company Pirro Mount?
Well, I'll answer that question first. That is something I came up with when I was 13 years old. Paramount. It just fit. And my logo at that time was a giant boob with stars around it. That was a little juvenile mind. But every film I've done since then has had a sort of a derived version of that. Even my last couple of logos, it looks like a little horseshoe, but there's a little nipple on the top of it. So, and some people look at it and say, "Is that what I think it is?" Yeah. But so that's been around forever. What was the other question you asked about?
Where can we find your films?
A lot of them are on Tubi TV, which you can find online. You just go, if you have a smart TV, it's probably one of your apps. If you go online, you type in Tubi TV, It takes you right to their website. If you go to their website and you type in my name, Mark Pirro, you'll see all the films that they have of mine. I think they have at least 7 of them now. Some of them you can find on Amazon Prime, or you can just get the DVDs directly. We sell all the DVDs on my website, which is Paramount.com. There's, in fact, we even sell merchandise there, because I don't know if you knew, but in the God Complex, we have a little Jesus toy, which was designed for the movie, but I ended up making a bunch of them to sell as a sort of a tie-in merchandising. And it basically works like the Magic 8-Ball. You pray to it, you twist the crown of thorns on its head, he screams, and then he answers your prayer. Actually happen to have one right here. There you go. This is the Jesus prayer answering talking head.
Nice.
Yeah. So like you ask him a question like, please Jesus, will I make $1 million this year? Yeah, so he'll answer it. My brain hurts, but I might change that. He says 100 different things. So because we use this for the movie, I thought, wouldn't it be fun to sell these as a real
the merchandising?
We did it. You're right. And we sold about 860 of them over the last 10 years. So it's not exactly setting the world on fire, but anyway, so that's that. But you can find, in fact, you can find those if you want a submissive Jesus. That's through our website as well, or you can go to a website called thesubmissivejesus.com. So we got stuff all over the place.
Well, I appreciate your time coming on here and talking with me. It was a pleasure. And hopefully, if you end up having any future projects, maybe we can go on and in the future. I can help, promote your film in any way, shape, or form that I can provide. Thank you for listening, ladies and gentlemen. Hopefully you enjoyed listening to our chat, and definitely go out and buy his films. I know I'm definitely going to buy your Buford's copy this weekend. I was just waiting another week till I got paid. So, appreciate your time, and thank you all for watching. So, enjoy.
Thank you.